Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Come on now, it's a beautiful day. We're in this gorgeous park. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
There you go. How you doing?
Good.
Good. I'm doing fine. Thanks for asking. It's a beautiful day. It's great to be with you today, this gorgeous day, a day of celebration. Celebrating how far individuals have come, how far families have come, and the notion that there is further to go. So my job this morning is to congratulate you, to tell you a bit about my story, and to share with you my optimism. I mean, I am an optimistic person by choice. My late mother used to always say that there are no such thing in life as stumbling blocks, only stepping stones, right? And it's all, and I know I'm in a space full of optimists, right? Or else you wouldn't be here. Optimistic about your own future, the future of your children. So, for the record, I'm Baptist. Now, for those of you who are not Baptist, simply all that means is that I believe in sort of interactive communication. So if I say something you agree with, feel free to clap your hands, say amen. It's all good. Amen? Amen. All righty. A stadium full of Baptists, it sounds like. So a little bit about my background. As was mentioned, I'm a professional journalist. I've been so for the past 36 years, which simply means that I'm old. So as a professional journalist at the network level, I've had the good fortune to interview, I've covered 3 wars. I've interviewed the last 6 presidents of the United States. I've been to 59 countries. I'm going to Africa in a few days. And at last count, I've watched 48 people die. I've watched as American service members gave their full measure to our great nation in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. I was in New York on 9/11, where more than 2,000 of our fellow citizens, their only sin that day was simply showing up for work. I went to Afghanistan a short time thereafter and watched as a 12-year-old boy was stoned to death for being a suspected Taliban fighter. I've covered 2 executions. I was a witness to I saw a man put to death in the electric chair in Virginia, and I was a witness to the execution of Timothy James McVeigh, a homegrown terrorist raised in a Christian household, convicted of killing 168 men, women, and children in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. So in many ways, as a journalist, I make my living covering death, and I've made my peace with that. But something that makes me uneasy is indifference. When good and decent people who are blessed with opportunity and resource are indifferent to the challenges they see around them, in their own families, in their own communities, when those people are indifferent to the impact they could have to make life better for someone else, indifference, I've learned, can be a deadly weapon. And so the core of my message to everyone today is don't be indifferent about your opportunity to change the world. Change the world. Change the world. Right where you are right now. I believe that all of us have the capacity to change the world, not simply because of the work I've done and the things I've seen. I believe that because of the life I've lived. You see, long before I was ever Byron Pitts of network television, I was a kid similar to a lot of the kids here with us this morning. I'm from Baltimore, raised by a single parent. My mother had her first child when she was 17. She had me before she finished high school. I didn't learn to read until I was almost 13 years old. I spoke with a stutter until I was 20, my junior year in college. When I was about 10 years old, failing all classes, not low grades, failing all classes, they brought me in for a series of tests. You know, and this was a test with important folks with initials on the backside of their names, right? Professional people, knowledgeable people. And so the day I went in for the testing to try and figure out why is it that Byron as a 10-year-old boy can't read at all. I was there with my mom. Her name is Clarice Pitts. God called her home 5 years ago, but I find reason every day to say her name out loud. So that day, my mother and I showed up to see what the issues were, and they ran me through a series of tests that took hours. And then a few days later, they brought us back to give us the test results as to see why it is that Byron can't read. And so these experts, these important people with these impressive titles, said, Ms. Pitts, we're sorry to inform you that it's our diagnosis that your son Byron is mentally retarded. Their words. And that was my mother's reaction, partly. My mother, a God-fearing woman, could quote scripture with any elder in a church. She could also carry on a conversation with any sailor or Marine, if you get my drift. So she had two reactions for the experts who told her about her child. So my mother said, well, test him again. They said, well, Miss Pitts, didn't you hear what we said? She said, well, didn't you hear what I said? Test him again. So, okay, after hearing some scripture and lines that perhaps only a sailor would say, they said, okay, fine. We'll test him again. So the series of tests again came back several weeks later, and he said, Ms. Pitts, we ran the test again as you asked, and we're not surprised, but the test results are the same. We believe that your son lacks the mental capacity to live what they described as a normal, healthy life. And because you lack the means and the resources to give him the help he needs, our recommendation is that you place him in an institution. And my mother said, well, what if I don't want to do that? They said, well, because of your limited means. By the way, my mother at that particular time had a 10th grade education. She was a seamstress at the London Fog Coat Factory in East Baltimore, not far from where we live. Now, eventually, she would go back to college. She would continue her education as an adult learner, get her GED, and after 9 years of studying, earned her college degree from a university in Baltimore, and spent the bulk of her professional life as a social worker working with families much like her own. But in a particular moment of crisis, she was a woman of limited means and limited education. So my mother listened, and she said, but what do I do if I don't want to put my son in an institution? They said, well, unfortunately for us, there wasn't the kind of program that we're all here to support today. There weren't the kind of resources and people who've devoted their professional life to helping those of us born with challenge, blessed to have challenge. So they said, well, you can bring him back when he's 18 years old. Perhaps when he's an adult, there'll be resource for him. And my mother says, if I wait until my child is 18 years old, my boy will be dead or in prison. My son needs help right now, but none was available. Fortunately for me, what my mother lacked in formal education at the time, she made up for what the old folk in the South would say, her knowledge of the Word. You see, for all of my life and for much of her life, my mother wore around her neck a small mustard seed encased in a clear plastic ball and a chain that she wore around her neck. I wear it now. It was my mother's daily reminder of the scripture in the book of Matthew that says, if you have faith just the size of a mustard seed, you can say to any mountain, move from here to there, and nothing will be impossible. It is with my mother's mountain-moving faith, she got me the help I needed, and I've been able to live my dreams. Now, I am respectful of where I am, the audience I'm with, and so I won't go far down the road about faith. But you asked me here to tell my story, and that's part of my story. It was the late, great Yankee catcher, Yogi Berra, who once said, always dance with the one that brung you. Always dance with the one that brung you. And so it is the faith I learned at my mother's knee that brought me to where I am. And so I share that in part respectfully with you. Though I was raised to be respectful of all faiths, and I am. As was mentioned, I've written a few books. The first book I wrote was called Step Out on Nothing. It was actually a story mostly about my mother. I'm a father, and for the fathers in the room, all due respect to us dads, right? I mean, we do the best we can. But there is something magical about a mother, right? I mean, right? A loving mother is incredible. I mean, fathers, right? We will show up to events like this when we're told to. We will go to practice. We will attend the events where we're instructed to attend. But a loving mother, a good mama will kill a brick for her child, right? Will do anything to create opportunity for their child to live their best life. So this first book I wrote, Step Out of Nothing, though about my life, was mostly about my late mother, Clarice Pitts. And so the title of the book, Step Out of Nothing, comes from actually a sermon I heard in the church I was attending at the time. It was a Women's Day service. And for those of you unfamiliar with the tradition of the black church, next to perhaps Christmas and Easter, there's nothing more significant than Women's Day, right? I mean, the women show up, hats, gloves, looking good, smelling better. It is a magical Sunday. So this particular Women's Day service, I was at church with my family, and the visiting minister, a woman, a female minister, she was talking to the congregation about manicures and pedicures and women's sore feet. I thought, my Lord, what time is it? Because there is nothing in this sermon at all for the fellas at church that morning. But then she said something that took my breath away. She said, for those of us who've had those moments in our life when our resume, our Rolodex, our last name, our 401k, our job position, our title isn't enough to get us past a difficult moment. For non-believers, they would say you are stepping out on nothing. But for people of faith, you know that you are stepping into that space where only God is. And so I thought that was my story, and perhaps it is a story of some here today. That you can't explain how you've been able to get to where you've gotten to at this point, as difficult as it might be. So the book is called Step Out on Nothing. Now, my mother was the first person to step out for me. And that's a no-brainer. That makes sense, right? Because our blood, our family, our mother, our father, our grandparents, aunt or uncle, it's a given that they will stand up for us in difficult times. But life has taught me that so often that there are other people who come into your life who will step out for you, who make a difference in your life. It could be a teacher, a counselor, a therapist, a coach. Another person who stepped out for me, as I said, I didn't learn to read until I was 12 going on 13. In high school, I never read beyond 9th grade level through high school. So I went to a school called Archbishop Curley High School. It was the best high school I could go into. It was a Catholic school in Baltimore. I like to say I had the best of both worlds. Raised Baptist, educated Catholic. Now when I give that joke in Boston, people fall out of their seats. Not so much in California. Good to know. So at Curley, all boys Catholic high school, I was ranked 445th out of 450 boys my freshman year. I've always thought, my Lord, I knew my challenges at 445. What, the fella at 446, 447, what must their life have been like? Well, I did graduate 40th in my class. Not the best student at my high school, but certainly the best I can be, as I'm sure there are a number of students here who can attest, and their parents can attest to the amazing things that can happen when people love on you, when you do the best you can, and you are provided opportunity to grow. And I did. So I went to Ohio Wesleyan University, the best school I could get into. California was too far to go to college, because I am a mama's boy, let the record show. So Ohio was as far as I could go. So we get to Ohio Wesleyan, and for me, my entire academic life, school was hard work. A lot of people talk about how wonderful school was. Not for me. Elementary school, hard work. High school, harder work. College, even harder work. So I get to college. I'm really excited to be in college. And I know I'm going to be a journalist, right? I want to major in journalism, become a storyteller, because I've learned to write. I still have my stutter I need to manage. So freshman year in college, I fail freshman English. Now think about that for a second. There are lots of reasons why the media in our country is so troubled. But here's a guy, millions of people watch me every single day to tell them what's going on in the world, and I fail freshman English. So that may speak to what's wrong with the news media in part in our country today. So I fail freshman English. I go home on Christmas break. Now my mother, a woman of great faith, my mother believed there was nothing that hard work and prayer couldn't overcome. maybe some profanity if necessary, but certainly hard work and prayer she believed could solve anything. So we decided, as a family, I would go back to college next semester. I'd work even harder, pray longer. And so I took the same professor the second semester, right, to see how I can do better. So I take the same professor, freshman English, second semester, and midway through the semester, you're always taking tests. Kids, you're going to be taking tests for like the next, like forever, it seems, right? So he was passing out the results of the midterm exams. And so when he gets to me, Ohio Wesleyan is a small liberal arts college, like 12 to 15 kids per class, passing out the midterms. And the professor announces to the entire class my test results. He says, "Mr. Pitts, congratulations, your best work thus far, D+. Come see me after class." Yes, sir. Followed him to his office, 17 years old. He said, "Mr. Pitts, don't sit down." He said, "Mr. Pitts, this won't take long." He said, "Based on my experience as a tenured professor," and it took him 20 minutes to say tenured. "As a tenured professor, I believe that you lack what's required to attend Ohio Wesleyan University. You're a waste of my time and the government's money. I think you should leave." I'm sure there are a lot of us here this morning who've been told by people who are supposed to know what we can't do, what we can't be. But I was 17 years old, raised to respect authority, so I left his office and I went to the admissions building next door and got the papers to withdraw from school. For those of us who are the first in your family to go to college, you know what a wonderful blessing that is, but also a burden. Because you're carrying not just your dreams, but the dreams and hopes of your family and the people who invested in you. So feeling the weight of that responsibility as I'm filling out these papers to leave college, I began to cry. Fellas, there's no shame in a man shedding tears. Now, these weren't like Hollywood tears. These were nose running, head shaking tears. Anyone ever cry like that? I mean, he just hurts so bad. It's like the ugly crying that you do sometimes. So as I'm sitting there on a bench on a beautiful day in Ohio, weeping, a stranger walks by. True story. I didn't know her. She didn't know me. But she simply said, "Young man, what's wrong?" Never underestimate the power of a kind word. So she sat down and she listened to my sad story for about 20 minutes. She said, "Well, son, before you quit school, come see me the next day." "Yes, ma'am." So when you're crying the way I described, I couldn't really hear what she said, right? You know when you're crying that way you can't really hear? So I couldn't hear, but she pointed and I found her the next day. Come to find out, this stranger was actually a professor at Ohio Wesleyan University. And not any professor, she was an English professor. And not any English professor, she was a first-year English professor. It was my first year at Ohio Wesleyan University. It was her first year there. She could have walked right past me, right? I wasn't one of her students. She was, as a young professional, she was focused on getting tenure herself. But she stopped and she talked to me and she listened to me and she encouraged me. She became my unofficial advisor. Her name is Ulla Luz. Ulla is from Estonia, a country ravaged by the Russians and then the Germans during World War II. The Methodist Church brought Ulla and her family to Roxbury, Massachusetts in the late 1940s. Please know that the Roxbury, Massachusetts of the late 1940s could be a difficult environment for a blue-eyed, blonde-haired white girl with an accent. I like to say that sort of because she had experienced struggle, she recognized it in somebody else. I like to say that Ulla didn't simply change my life, she saved my life. She stepped out on nothing for me. And many of you who are here today, that's what you do. You are, as I would describe, you are angels. Angels. That you step out for young people that you may not be related to. And you love on them. You give them the best that you have. You encourage them. The parents who are here this morning, you are angels. I think about my late mother and all that she gave me. Someone asked my mother once, how was she as a single parent able to send 3 kids to college? And my mother said, oh, it was simple. I told each child, you will go to college or I will beat you to death. I'd imagine there's some of us who had similar inspiration to stay in school. So to the parents today, thank you for loving on your children, for believing in them, perhaps on some days when no one else does. I think about all the days in my life in school when I was told I was dumb, I was stupid, I was retarded, that it was my mother. Like now it's fashionable for people to like and to believe in Byron Pitts. But when I was a little boy, it was only my mother who believed in me. So the parents here today, know that because you love your child, because you believe in your child, they have everything they need to be successful in this life. Everything because of you. Life has also taught me that sometimes I think when we step out for someone else, we think it has to be either a loved one or someone beneath us, or younger than us, or needier than us. But that's not really how it works. That sometimes we can reach out to a peer, to a fellow parent who might be dealing with the same struggle that you know well. In college, my best friend in college was a guy named Peter Holthe from Minnetonka, Minnesota. It's fair to say I'd never met anyone from Minnetonka, Minnesota, and Pete had never met anyone from East Baltimore, if you know what I'm saying. In fact, all through college, Pete would call me baby boy. I think that's what a white dude from Minnesota thought it would be say to a brother from East Baltimore. He would call me baby boy. So one night, late at night, we're up late at night, as all of us who went to college can remember those days, 3 o'clock in the morning, you're up eating your cold pizza, drinking your favorite beverage, solving the world's problems. So one of those nights, Pete and I were up. Pete says, baby boy, let me ask you a question. Yeah, man, what is it? Why is it that you're doing so poorly in class, because I see your test results, and sometimes I don't understand what you're saying when you talk to me. You don't use the right words. Like, what's that about? Well, once I got over the initial embarrassment of being called out, because sometimes the truth can hurt, right? Sometimes when you're told where you are at a particular moment, it's difficult. But it's amazing how much better the truth can be accepted when it's said with a kind word. When you know that truth is coming from someone who genuinely cares for you. So once I got over the sensation to slap Pete for calling me out, I explained to him my situation. Because of my early issues with literacy, by the time I went to college, I'd only read one book for enjoyment. By my freshman year in college, I was reading about it on the 9th grade level. So in many ways, I wasn't prepared yet for the college experience. So when I explained Pete my situation, he says, okay, baby boy, I got you. He said, here's what we're going to do. Every day for the next 4 years, I'm going to give you a new word in the dictionary. You're going to say it, spell it, use it in a sentence. We're going to do that every day for 4 years because when I graduate, you're going to graduate with me. I was 17 years old. Pete was 18 years old. He had nothing to give me except for access to his brilliant mind. Pete was someone else who stepped out on nothing for me. So for the students here today who may think because of your challenges that you have nothing to offer, I would imagine at your school there might be a classmate who has similar challenges, who may have heard similar things said to them about them, that you can step out for them and offer them a kind word. Where others may say they're different, you can be the one to tell them how special they are. You can share your own struggle with them. For the professionals here today who've devoted your professional life to working with families and young people who are challenged, look for some of the gray-haired and the bald people in your office who've seen a couple things. And maybe they can offer you a kind word of instruction to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, because it's important. You know, as a professional journalist, it is my job, I am a paid critic, right? It's my job to go places and to often point out things that are wrong. But life has taught me that for all of our challenges, and we have many, America, to my estimation, is still the greatest country on earth. The promise of America is unlike any place on earth. No matter where you're born, where you come from, the language which you speak, in America still anything is possible. We are an incredibly generous and supportive nation. When I covered the earthquake in Haiti, some of the first responders were American doctors. When I went to Indonesia to cover the tsunami there, faith-based organizations, therapists, specialists, clinicians from the United States flew there, often at their own expense, to help people. So there's something perhaps in our DNA that we are generous and supportive and kind people. Your presence here today on this beautiful day, you could have done a variety of things on a Saturday morning on a beautiful day in Northern California, but you chose to be here. And that speaks to your desire to be of service, to help your fellow man, to help your child. And I applaud you for that. As I prepare to take my seat, I want to leave you with a story that I told a group of folks earlier today, and I'll share it with you about why all of us have important work to do. Whether you are a parent of someone who has challenges, if you are that child that has challenges, all of us have an opportunity and a responsibility to help someone else. About 6 years ago now, I was talking at a middle school in Baltimore, where I'm from, to middle school students. And normally when I talk to middle school students, the kind of questions I get is, do you know Jay-Z? Have you ever interviewed Beyonce? What kind of car do you drive, right? Okay, so we get, and the answer is, yes, I live in New York, so I don't have a car. So, at the end of my formal remarks, and talking about the importance of education and hanging in there and doing the best you can, this adorable 11-year-old girl waited patiently to talk to me. None of you know her, but all of you have met her. None of you know her, but all of you have met her. Her name is Pilar. I write about her in my book, Be the One, a book about young people who were all dealt a difficult hand, but in some way, almost on their own, they decided that they would not be victims, they would be victors in their life. So Pilar, she comes up to me after my speech, I've talked to her classmates and the adults. She said, Mr. Pitts, when you were my age, when you were 11 years old in Baltimore, and Pilar was in what was called, described at this school as a special needs class, because Pilar, like many of us, was one of the 1 in 5. She had some challenges, academic challenges. She was different from a lot of other people at her school. So Pilar says, Mr. Pitts, when you were my age, when you were 11 years old growing up in Baltimore, this is her question. Where did you go, where did you hide when the world hurt too much? Where did you go, where did you hide when the world hurt too much? My friends, we live in the most powerful country on earth, and where no child should ever have to ask that question, but we know that they do. A bit of her backstory. Pilar was born, her mother was 16 years old when she had her, not much older than my mother, a child herself. At age 4, her mother had a choice to make, her new boyfriend or her child, and she chose her new boyfriend. From age 4 to 7, Pilar slept on couches, on the floor, at a relative's house, at an auntie's house, at someone from the church, a teacher. At 7, her fortunes changed a bit, and so the social services finally recognized this child in crisis and reached out to help her and placed her in foster care. Her foster mother was an 81-year-old woman, a diabetic who suffered from fainting spells. One can make the argument that Pilar at 7 was taking care of this woman as much as she was taking care of her. But it was still better than the life she was living. At age 10, her fortunes changed again. Perhaps because of her loving heart or the economics of it, her foster mom decided to take in a few more children. Including the group that she brought in was a 16-year-old boy. His first night, he went into Pilar's room after dark when everyone else was asleep. He crawled in next to her and whispered in her ear, "You don't matter. No one will care." And that was her reality for the next year and a half. When I met her and she asked the question, where do you go, where do you hide when the world hurts too much? Fortunately for Pilar in that moment, there was a young teacher who saw us talking and came to me afterwards and says, what did she want? She didn't talk to anybody. And I shared with her the question, she did her research, and they got Pilar out of that situation. I'm happy to report that this morning that Pilar is a university student at Stevenson University in my home state of Maryland. She got there. You can applaud about that. That is, right? She got there because there were some loving adults in her life. Now, in my case, I had my mama, right? But life, if you just have one person in your corner, if it's a teacher, if it's a parent, if it's a foster parent, if it's a coach, a counselor, it's enough. It's enough. And so there were enough people who cobbled together their love and their wisdom to share with this young lady, and now she's in college. We talk often. We've become pen pals. Actually, I'm showing my age now. We email each other. And so we were talking just last week, and she was complaining about midterm exams. I said, oh, Lord, how good is God? I started laughing. She said, Mr. Pitts, why are you laughing at me? I said, honey, the fact that your biggest trouble right now are midterm exams speaks to how far you've come and how wonderful life is for you now. As I leave you, because of the work I do, and I spent a good portion of my career in war zones, dangerous places, that when I walk into spaces, I quickly have to make assessments about people. Can I trust you with my life? Do I take the directions you gave us to go down this road? Will you harm us or not? So I do that. Forgive me, but I make snap judgments about people. So when I first took the stage, I made snap judgments about all of you. Now you look good. Let's be clear about that. You're looking good this morning. But it seemed to me I kind of broke all of you into sort of two groups. Some of you, I'll call you the children of privilege. I would imagine there are people here for whom life has been comfortable almost your entire life. Perhaps you're an entrepreneur and run a business, well educated, live in a comfortable home and surrounded by loving and supportive family and friends. And for you, life has been good. I say, awesome, congratulations. You have a responsibility to be engaged in this kind of work. Part of this, the EdRev celebration, right? Because there are young people, there are parents who need to see what comfort looks like. One of the great things for my mama, who raised me by herself, were the parents at my high school where there was a father and a mother. That actually inspired my mother in many ways and encouraged her to keep going. So for those of you born of privilege, don't ever apologize for it. But you have a responsibility to be of service for people who've not had lives like you. The other folk, my folk. I call you all the children of the storm. People who've been told, not now, not you, not here, you're not good enough. You're not ready, you're not worthy. For those of you who may be the first in your family to own a business, the first to go to college, the first to graduate high school, you have a unique responsibility to be of service at this time in this way. Because there is a child somewhere in your space who you need to hold by both cheeks and tell them that you can make it. You can live a great life. You can make it because I made it. You're going to make it because I'm going to help you make it. My friends, for all of us, no matter where we are in our life, the late Booker T. Washington put it this way: plant your bucket where you stand. Plant your bucket where you stand. Whether you are 5 years old, 50 years old, 75 years old, you are blessed with opportunity. If you're one of those people, one of the five, and you have one of the challenges, mine were literacy and speech, know this: to my estimation, you are incredibly blessed. You're fortunate. I believe that. I mean, it's not just because my Bible tells me to count it all joy, but if you're the 1 in 5 and you're challenged, here's what that tells me about you: that you are tough. That you are tough. Tough will take you a long way in this life. If you've had some challenge in life, that tells me you have some measure of empathy. Empathy is a wonderful gift to share with other people. So if you are one of the five, count it all joy. Be unapologetic about whatever your challenge is. Seek out the people who will step out for you. And be willing, even where you are in the moment, to step out for someone else. All of us have a responsibility to be the one when someone comes into our life and they ask, where do I go, where do I hide when the world hurts too much? That we be the ones to say, come to me. God bless you. Thank you so much.